The biting wind whipped around me, a cruel echo of the words still ringing in my ears. "We can't afford you, mother." Mark, his voice as cold and hard as the real estate deals he brokered, had delivered the final blow. Sarah, ever the actress, had dabbed at dry eyes, her sympathy as manufactured as her designer clothes. And David, my youngest, had simply looked away, his silence a deafening confirmation of his complicity. They stood on the porch of Eleanor's former family home, a place I had built with my own hands, a place I had nurtured with my love. Now, it was a fortress against me. My few belongings, shoved into a worn canvas bag, felt impossibly heavy. My Eleanor's old worn coat, a faithful companion through countless seasons, offered little warmth against the chill that had settled deep within my bones. 72 years. 72 years of sacrifice, of unwavering devotion, of building this family brick by painstaking brick. And this was my reward, the street. The pavement was unforgiving beneath my sensible shoes. Each step was a testament to their betrayal, a physical manifestation of their greed. They saw me as a financial drain, a burden to be shed like an unwanted skin. They hadn't even bothered with pretense, no polite suggestions of a short stay elsewhere. Just a brutal, swift eviction. I clutched the worn fabric of my coat tighter, the rough wool a stark contrast to the smooth, unfeeling faces of my children. The world, once a familiar landscape, now seemed alien and hostile. I was a ghost in my own life, cast out by the very people I had brought into existence. The weight of their abandonment was a physical ache, a crushing pressure that threatened to steal my breath. Yet beneath the despair, a flicker of something else began to ignite. A cold, hard ember of resolve. They had thrown me out. They had underestimated me. And they would soon learn the true cost of their betrayal. The biting wind seemed to seep through the very weave of Eleanor's old worn coat, a chilling reminder of the abrupt end to her 72 years of life as she knew it. The pavement, cold and unforgiving, offered no solace as she walked, each step a testament to the stark reality of her abandonment. Eleanor Vance, matriarch, builder, nurturer, was now a solitary figure on a public street, her few possessions a meager testament to a life summarily dismissed. The faces of Mark, Sarah, and David, etched with a chilling blend of indifference and avarice, replayed in her mind's eye, each memory a fresh stab of pain. They had cast her out, deemed her a burden too heavy to bear, a financial liability to be shed without a second thought. The carefully constructed edifice of her family, the home she had poured her heart and soul into, now stood as a monument to their betrayal, a fortress from which she was irrevocably exiled. As the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a gnawing emptiness, Eleanor's thoughts drifted, seeking any anchor in the tempest of her despair. The cold air bit at her exposed cheeks, and she instinctively pulled the worn wool of her coat tighter, the familiar texture a small, albeit inadequate, comfort. It was then, amidst the disarray of her thoughts and the harsh reality of her surroundings, that a faint memory surfaced, a forgotten whisper from a time not so long ago. A lottery ticket. She had bought it on a whim, a fleeting moment of hopeful indulgence weeks prior, tucked away in the deep cavernous pocket of her coat. The memory was fragile, almost lost in the overwhelming chaos of her present circumstances, but it was there, a tiny spark in the encroaching darkness. Her pace quickened, a nascent urgency propelling her forward. The bus stop was a few blocks away, a small utilitarian shelter against the elements. The fare, a mere handful of coins, now represented a significant hurdle. She fumbled in her coat pocket, her fingers brushing against the rough fabric, searching for the crumpled paper that held a sliver of possibility. The weight of her meager belongings in the canvas bag seemed to grow heavier with each step, a physical manifestation of her sudden destitution. The world felt vast and indifferent, the city sounds a cacophony of harsh noises that offered no sympathy. Reaching the bus stop, Eleanor peered at the faded timetable, the numbers blurring slightly through unshed tears. The bus was due in 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like an eternity. She clutched the worn fabric of her coat, her knuckles white. The ticket. She had to find the ticket. Her hand delved deeper into the pocket, past stray tissues and a forgotten button. And then, her fingers closed around it, a small rectangular piece of paper, slightly creased but intact. The golden chance, loterie ticket. A fragile beacon of hope in the bleak landscape of her current existence. With the ticket safely in her hand, she boarded the bus, the driver barely glancing at her as she handed over the exact fare, her movements stiff and deliberate. The worn seat of the bus offered little comfort, but Eleanor barely noticed. She sat by the window, watching the familiar streets blur past, now seen through the prism of her newfound solitude. The city, once the backdrop to her life, now seemed a hostile territory. Each building, each street corner, held memories of her family, of the life that had been so unceremoniously snatched away. Yet, the small piece of paper in her pocket, the golden chance ticket, pulsed with a quiet promise. It was a gamble, a long shot, but it was hers. And for the first time since being cast out, a genuine albeit tentative glimmer of hope began to warm the icy chill that had settled deep within her soul. The journey to the convenience store felt like a pilgrimage, each mile a step away from despair and perhaps, towards a future she could still shape. The bus lurched to a stop, the hiss of its brakes a jarring punctuation to the quiet hum of my thoughts. I stepped off onto the sidewalk. The city air, though still cool, felt different here, charged with an unspoken energy. This was it. The Lottery Claim Center. A stark, modern building that seemed to absorb the very sunlight around it. It was a place where destinies were rewritten, where the mundane could be transformed into the extraordinary with the presentation of a single piece of paper. My hands, I noticed, were no longer just cold, they were trembling. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, almost reverent. A few other individuals sat in the waiting area, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety. I clutched the winning lottery ticket in my palm, the paper a fragile shield against the enormity of what it represented. It felt impossibly small, yet it held the weight of my entire future. I approached the counter, my sensible shoes making little sound on the polished floor. A man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor sat behind a clean, uncluttered desk. He looked up, offering a polite smile. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. This was Mr. Henderson, the nameplate on his desk read. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves.
Yes, I managed, my voice a little raspy. I believe you have a winning ticket.
I slid the crumpled paper across the counter. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs.
Monsieur.
Henderson picked it up with practiced care, his expression neutral as he examined it. He scanned the barcode, his fingers moving with efficiency.
The second stretched into an eternity.
I watched his face, searching for any flicker of recognition, any sign that this was real. Then, his eyebrows rose.
A slow, almost imperceptible no.
He looked up from the ticket, his gaze meeting mine, and in his eyes I saw it. Disbelief, quickly masked by professional composure. "Madam," he began, his voice now carrying a different weight, a hushed reverence. This is quite remarkable." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, or perhaps, bracing himself to deliver the news. "You have indeed won the Golden Chance Lottery." He pushed a small calculator towards me. The jackpot for this draw was, let me see. He tapped a few keys. The numbers that appeared on the small screen were astronomical.
Staggering. Life-altering. My besieged.
It was more money than I had ever dared to imagine, more than I had ever seen in my life. This wasn't just a win, it was a complete, absolute reversal of fortune.
This is correct. I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. Monsieur.
Henderson nodded, his smile now genuine, tinged with awe. Absolutely correct, Mrs.
Vance.
Congratulations. This is a truly unbelievable win. He spoke softly, ensuring our conversation remained private. We'll need to complete some paperwork, of course, and discuss the best way to proceed with claiming such a substantial prize. We can arrange for a private consultation to ensure your privacy and security. He gestured towards a door behind his desk. If you'd like to step this way, we can begin the process. As I followed him, the trembling in my hands intensified, but it was no longer from fear or cold. It was the tremor of a life irrevocably changed. The weight of the world, which had felt so crushing just moments before, began to lift, replaced by the dizzying lightness of possibility. The harsh city street outside, the memory of my children's callous faces, the gnawing emptiness, it all seemed to recede, fading into the background as I stepped into a future I had never dared to dream of. This was more than just winning money, it was winning back my life, my dignity, my power.
Monsieur.
Henderson was a man who understood discretion. He guided me through the labyrinthine processes of claiming my winnings with a quiet efficiency that soothed my frayed nerves. We sat in a private room, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and unspoken possibilities. The sheer volume of numbers on the official documents still made my head spin, but the reality was sinking in, layer by layer. This wasn't a dream, it was a tangible, life-altering shift. I signed where he indicated, my hand steadier now, the tremor replaced by a nascent sense of control. He explained the options for managing such a windfall, the importance of diversification, and the necessity of professional financial advice. He even offered a list of reputable advisors, a thoughtful gesture that spoke volumes about his commitment to his clients. "We'll need to establish a secure method for transferring these funds, Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "And I highly recommend we begin looking into suitable accommodations. Given your preferences for a serene environment and excellent amenities, I have a few premier retirement communities in mind. One, in particular, along the California coast, is exceptionally well regarded." The mention of a coastal community, a place of sunshine and sea breezes, felt like a balm to my weary soul. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the elegant lines of a designer handbag resting on the table beside me, a stark contrast to the worn canvas bag I'd carried just days ago. It was a gift from Mr. Henderson's office, a small token of their service, but it felt like a symbol of my own burgeoning transformation. My old, downtrodden persona, the one my children had so readily discarded, was beginning to fray at the edges, replaced by a woman who was, for the first time in a long time, looking forward. Over the next few weeks, my life underwent a quiet, almost imperceptible metamorphosis.
Monsieur Henderson facilitated everything.
He handled the initial transfer of funds, ensuring my privacy was paramount. He coordinated with the admissions department at Serenity Shores, the very community he'd mentioned. I found myself engaged in activities I'd long since set aside, browsing upscale boutiques, selecting new furnishings for a life I was building anew, and even revisiting my wardrobe. The drab, sensible clothing of my former existence was being replaced by fabrics that whispered of quality and style. I chose a few select pieces, including a beautiful silk scarf that felt luxurious against my skin, a small indulgence that felt profoundly empowering. The arrangements for my move were swift and discreet. I packed my few remaining belongings, not with the dread of displacement, but with the quiet anticipation of a new beginning. The thought of my children, of their callous disregard, still pricked at me, but the sting was fading, dulled by the sheer magnitude of my newfound independence. I was no longer the burden they had so easily cast aside. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was finally truly on my own terms. The journey ahead was still unfolding, but for the first time since that dreadful day, the path felt illuminated, not by the harsh glare of betrayal, but by the soft, steady glow of my own quiet victory. The drive to Serenity Shores was a blur of sun-drenched landscapes and the gentle hum of a luxury car I no longer had to worry about affording. Mr. Henderson had arranged everything, from the discreet transport to my new spacious villa overlooking the Pacific. Stepping out, the air itself felt different, clean, salty, and alive. It was a stark contrast to the stale, oppressive atmosphere of my former life. My new home was a haven of light and comfort, furnished with impeccable taste. Gone were the drab, worn pieces that had once filled my children's house. Here, everything spoke of quality and peace. I unpacked the few essentials I'd brought, including the small box containing my most cherished possessions. Among them, nestled in tissue paper, was a gift from my late husband. It felt like a tangible link to a time when love and respect were not commodities to be bartered. I pinned it to the lapel of a soft, dove-gray cashmere sweater I'd purchased during my quiet transformation. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes, though still bearing the echoes of past pain, now held a spark of something new, anticipation. The community itself was a revelation. Manicured gardens, sparkling fountains, and the gentle murmur of contented residents created an ambience of tranquil prosperity. I found myself drawn to a sunlit patio where a group of women were enjoying afternoon tea. One of them, a woman with a warm smile and kind eyes, introduced herself as Brenda Miller. "Welcome to Serenity Shores," she said, her voice a melodic lilt. "You look like you've finally found your way home. We talked for hours that first day." Brenda, who had been a resident for several years, shared stories of her own journey, her own triumphs over adversity. She spoke of her children with a similar weariness that I knew all too well, but her perspective was one of acceptance, not bitterness. She'd learned to find joy in her own company, in the simple pleasures that life offered. Listening to her, I felt a loosening in my chest, a release of the tightly coiled tension that had become my constant companion. That evening, I dined in the community's elegant restaurant. The menu was extensive, the food exquisite. I ordered the pan-seared salmon with lemon dill sauce, a far cry from the meager meals I had grown accustomed to. Each bite was a small act of defiance, a reclamation of my right to comfort and pleasure. I savored the flavors, the quiet clinking of silverware, the polite conversation around me. It was a world away from the tense silences and forced pleasantries of my children's home. As I walked back to my villa under a sky dusted with stars, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The weight of my past, the sting of my children's betrayal, had not vanished entirely, but it no longer defined me. Here at Serenity Shores, surrounded by beauty and the promise of genuine connection, I was Eleanor Vance, not just a victim but a survivor. I was rediscovering myself, piece by precious piece, and the feeling was intoxicating. It was the taste of freedom, and it was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. The Mr. Henderson had provided, a sleek modern device, felt surprisingly natural in my hand as I checked for any messages, though I knew no one from my past would be reaching out. Not yet, anyway. The real game was just beginning. It had been a few weeks since my arrival at Serenity Shores. Weeks of rediscovering simple joys, of breathing air that didn't carry the stale scent of resentment, of feeling the sun on my skin without the gnawing ache of abandonment. My transformation, carefully orchestrated by Mr. Henderson and embraced by my own burgeoning will, was more than skin deep. It was a recalibration of my very being. I still carried the quiet dignity of my past, but it was now overlaid with a newfound confidence, a subtle sheen of prosperity that even I, looking in the mirror, found remarkable. Today, I had decided to venture into the city, a familiar landscape now viewed through entirely new eyes. I chose the Gilded Lily, a restaurant I'd always admired from afar, a place that whispered of exclusivity and refined taste. It felt like a fitting stage for the next act in my unfolding life. I wore a tailored navy suit, the fabric soft against my skin, and a delicate pearl necklace that complemented the subtle elegance of my demeanor. A touch of lipstick, a sweep of mascara, and I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who belonged, not in the shadows but in the light. As I was being shown to my table, a familiar voice, tinged with a dismissive impatience, cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Table for one? Are you sure you don't want to wait for someone, madam? We have a rather exclusive clientele tonight." I turned, a polite smile playing on my lips. Standing there, looking utterly self-important, was Mark. My Mark. He hadn't changed, not really. The same sharp suit, the same air of arrogant entitlement. But he didn't recognize me. Not at first. My appearance, the subtle shift in my posture, the quiet self-possession that now radiated from me, had rendered me a stranger. He scanned me, his gaze lingering for a moment on the subtle gleam of my pearl necklace, then flickered away, dismissing me as inconsequential. No, I'm quite fine," I said, my voice calm measured, betraying none of the complex emotions swirling within me. "I'm meeting someone." His eyes flickered back, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Perhaps it was the expensive cut of my suit, or the way I held myself, a stark contrast to the frail dependent woman he had so easily discarded. He offered a curt nod, a gesture of professional courtesy that felt like a slap in the face. He moved on, barking instructions to a maitre d', oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, the first subtle tremor of my carefully constructed revenge. He was so focused on his own perceived importance, so blinded by his own success, that he couldn't see the woman who had once been his mother, standing just feet away, a ghost from his past now cloaked in a future he could only dream of. A small private smile touched my lips. The game, as I had said, was truly just beginning. The encounter with Mark at the Gilded Lily had been a carefully orchestrated prelude, a subtle testing of the waters. It had confirmed my suspicions. My transformation was so profound, so complete, that my own son no longer recognized me. This knowledge, once a source of pain, now fueled a quiet, simmering satisfaction. It was a testament to the meticulous planning, to the careful shedding of the old Eleanor and the emergence of this new, confident woman. A few days later, I found myself drawn to the city's more exclusive shopping district. Serenity Shores offered a comfortable, if somewhat insulated existence, but I craved the pulse of the world outside, the tangible reminders of my regained status. I was browsing a designer boutique, admiring the exquisite tailoring of a cashmere coat, when a familiar voice, high-pitched and laced with an almost desperate attempt at casualness, sliced through the hushed atmosphere. "Eleanor? Is that really you?" I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping over Sarah. She was dressed in an outfit that, while expensive, felt a touch too ostentatious, a desperate attempt to project an image of effortless wealth that didn't quite land. In her hand, she clutched a familiar, if slightly worn designer handbag, a stark contrast to the new sleek tote I was currently considering. My heart gave a small, almost imperceptible flutter, not of fear or dread, but of a peculiar detached amusement. She looked flustered. Her eyes, wide and searching, darted from my face to the luxurious handbag I carried, then back again, a silent question hanging in the air. She was clearly trying to reconcile the woman before her with the mother she had so callously cast aside. I offered a polite, measured smile, the kind that conveys warmth without revealing any true depth of emotion. "Sarah," I acknowledged, my voice even, betraying none of the complex tapestry of feelings that had once defined my relationship with her. "What a surprise to see you here." Her confusion was palpable. She took a hesitant step closer, her gaze now fixed on the designer handbag I held. It was a new acquisition, a symbol of my present, not my past. The bag itself was understated elegant, crafted from the finest leather, a far cry from anything she might have associated with her mother's previous circumstances. I didn't expect to see you out and about," she stammered, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fray at the edges. "You look, well." The unspoken addendum hung heavy in the air. I still carried the quiet dignity of my past, but it was now overlaid with a newfound confidence, a subtle sheen of prosperity that even I, looking in the mirror, found remarkable. Today, I had decided to venture into the city, a familiar landscape now viewed through entirely new eyes. I chose the Gilded Lily, a restaurant I'd always admired from afar, a place that whispered of exclusivity and refined taste. It felt like a fitting stage for the next act in my unfolding life. I wore a tailored navy suit, the fabric soft against my skin, and a delicate pearl necklace that complemented the subtle elegance of my demeanor. A touch of lipstick, a sweep of mascara, and I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who belonged, not in the shadows but in the light. As I was being shown to my table, a familiar voice, tinged with a dismissive impatience, cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Table for one? Are you sure you don't want to wait for someone, madam? We have a rather exclusive clientele tonight." I turned, a polite smile playing on my lips. Standing there, looking utterly self-important, was Mark. My Mark. He hadn't changed, not really. The same sharp suit, the same air of arrogant entitlement. But he didn't recognize me. Not at first. My appearance, the subtle shift in my posture, the quiet self-possession that now radiated from me, had rendered me a stranger. He scanned me, his gaze lingering for a moment on the subtle gleam of my pearl necklace, then flickered away, dismissing me as inconsequential. No, I'm quite fine," I said, my voice calm, measured, betraying none of the complex emotions swirling within me. "I'm meeting someone." His eyes flickered back, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Perhaps it was the expensive cut of my suit, or the way I held myself, a stark contrast to the frail, dependent woman he had so easily discarded. He offered a curt nod, a gesture of professional courtesy that felt like a slap in the face. He moved on, barking instructions to a maitre d', oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, the first subtle tremor of my carefully constructed revenge. He was so focused on his own perceived importance, so blinded by his own success, that he couldn't see the woman who had once been his mother, standing just feet away, a ghost from his past now cloaked in a future he could only dream of. A small private smile touched my lips. The game, as I had said, was truly just beginning. The encounter with Mark at the Gilded Lily had been a carefully orchestrated prelude, a subtle testing of the waters. It had confirmed my suspicions. My transformation was so profound, so complete, that my own son no longer recognized me. This knowledge, once a source of pain, now fueled a quiet, simmering satisfaction. It was a testament to the meticulous planning, to the careful shedding of the old Eleanor and the emergence of this new, confident woman. A few days later, I found myself drawn to the city's more exclusive shopping district. Serenity Shores offered a comfortable, if somewhat insulated existence, but I craved the pulse of the world outside, the tangible reminders of my regained status. I was browsing a designer boutique, admiring the exquisite tailoring of a cashmere coat, when a familiar voice, high-pitched and laced with an almost desperate attempt at casualness, sliced through the hushed atmosphere. "Eleanor? Is that really you?" I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping over Sarah. She was dressed in an outfit that, while expensive, felt a touch too ostentatious, a desperate attempt to project an image of effortless wealth that didn't quite land. In her hand, she clutched a familiar, if slightly worn designer handbag, a stark contrast to the new sleek tote I was currently considering. My heart gave a small, almost imperceptible flutter, not of fear or dread, but of a peculiar detached amusement. She looked flustered. Her eyes, wide and searching, darted from my face to the luxurious handbag I carried, then back again, a silent question hanging in the air. She was clearly trying to reconcile the woman before her with the mother she had so callously cast aside. I offered a polite, measured smile, the kind that conveys warmth without revealing any true depth of emotion. "Sarah," I acknowledged, my voice even, betraying none of the complex tapestry of feelings that had once defined my relationship with her. "What a surprise to see you here." Her confusion was palpable. She took a hesitant step closer, her gaze now fixed on the designer handbag I held. It was a new acquisition, a symbol of my present, not my past. The bag itself was understated elegant, crafted from the finest leather, a far cry from anything she might have associated with her mother's previous circumstances. I didn't expect to see you out and about," she stammered, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fray at the edges. "You look, well." The unspoken addendum hung heavy in the air. What mattered was the truth of it, the quiet contentment I had painstakingly built for myself. He finally took a tentative step closer, his hand still clutching the folded paper. "Mom, we've been thinking about you."
Thinking about me.
After all this time. After the eviction, the silence, the calculated neglect. The irony was almost too rich to bear. I simply waited, my expression unreadable, letting his words hang in the air between us, heavy with unspoken regret and a desperate hope for absolution. His discomfort was a tangible thing, a silent testament to the chasm that now separated us, a chasm he himself had helped to widen. This was not the family reunion they might have envisioned. This was merely another scene in a play I was directing, a subtle reminder of the consequences of their choices. The gentle hum of the park faded as I returned to Serenity Shores. The encounter with David, though brief, had stirred a familiar, yet now muted echo of past pains. It was a stark reminder of the chasm that had opened between us, a chasm carved by their own hands. Yet, in its wake, a peculiar sense of calm settled over me. His hesitant words, his averted gaze, spoke volumes more than any apology could. He had seen me. He had recognized me, not as the frail woman they had cast aside, but as someone different. And in that difference, I sensed a seed of unease planted in his mind, a whisper of the truth they had so desperately tried to bury. The days that followed were filled with the quiet routines of my new life. Brenda and I shared afternoon tea on my sun-drenched patio, her easy laughter a welcome counterpoint to the more complex emotions that often swirled within me. We discussed books, reminisced about our younger days, and occasionally, she would gently inquire about my children. I offered vague, polite answers, never dwelling on the harsh reality of their betrayal. My focus remained on the present, on the carefully constructed piece I had built. It was during one of these serene afternoons that Brenda, her brow furrowed with a mixture of concern and curiosity, mentioned a conversation she'd had at the local market. "Eleanor," she began, her voice low, "I ran into Margaret Peterson earlier."
You know, from the bridge club back in Serenity Shore.
I nodded, a faint smile playing on my lips. Margaret was a notorious gossip, her ears always tuned to the faintest whisper of intrigue. "Well," Brenda continued, her gaze meeting mine, "she seemed rather surprised to see me with you. She mentioned she'd heard something about you, something about a lottery win. She was asking if it was true, if you'd really come into money." A slow, deliberate breath escaped me.
So, the whisper had begun.
It was inevitable, of course. Secrets, especially those involving sudden life-altering fortunes, rarely stayed buried for long. Margaret, no doubt, had been privy to some hushed conversation, some overheard remark, and had immediately set about disseminating the information with her usual relish. It wasn't direct, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that the news of my windfall had, in its own indirect way, found its way back to the ears that mattered most. I pictured Mark's calculating mind, Sarah's avaricious glint, David's wavering guilt, all now undoubtedly fueled by this burgeoning rumor. They would be piecing it together, their suspicions solidifying into a shared, unspoken certainty. The carefully orchestrated detachment I had maintained was about to face its next inevitable test. The game, as always, was unfolding precisely as I had anticipated. The quiet ripple of gossip was merely the prelude to the storm I intended to unleash. The whispers, it seemed, had amplified into a chorus. Margaret Peterson, bless her gossiping heart, had done her work efficiently. The news of my lottery win, once a carefully guarded secret, was now a palpable entity, a scent on the wind that my children could no doubt detect. I could almost feel their collective senses prickling, their avarice, long dormant but never extinguished, reawakening with a vengeance. From my vantage point at Serenity Shores, the world felt both distant and intimately connected. Brenda, ever the perceptive friend, had noticed my quiet contemplation. "Something on your mind, Eleanor?" she'd asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. I'd offered a vague smile, a non-committal shrug. How could I explain the intricate web of emotions that had begun to spin within me? It wasn't just about the money, though its abundance was a powerful tool. It was about the exquisite irony, the perfect symmetry of their betrayal and their subsequent inevitable scramble. Later that week, my smartphone, a sleek modern device that still felt somewhat alien in my hands, buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Mark. The sender's name, stark against the screen, sent a familiar tremor through me, a phantom echo of the years of manufactured deference I'd once offered.
Hésitated, maille fingée hovering over the screen.
I knew what this would be, what they would all be doing. This wasn't a spontaneous outpouring of familial love, it was a calculated maneuver, a strategic reconnaissance. Mark's message was a masterpiece of insincerity.
Mom, darling.
So sorry I haven't been in touch. Things have been incredibly hectic with the new development project. I was just thinking about you and hoping you're doing well. Perhaps we could catch up soon? I'd love to hear how you're settling in. The saccharine sweetness of it was almost nauseating. He painted a picture of a busy, successful son, completely oblivious to the fact that I was now his financial superior. Then came Sarah's. Hers was a more emotional appeal, a subtle tug at my heartstrings. "Dearest mother," it began, "I've been so worried about you. I know things were difficult, and I deeply regret not being there for you more. Mark and David have been talking, and we all feel terrible. We miss you terribly. When are you free for a visit? I'd love to cook you your favorite dinner." Her words dripped with feigned remorse, a carefully crafted narrative of regret designed to disarm and entice. David's was the most hesitant, a flicker of genuine unease perhaps, or simply the lingering guilt of the weakest link. "Hi Mom," it read.
Au pure ok.
"Saw you the other day in the park. You looked good. Really good. Mark and Sarah were saying we should reach out. Let me know if you want to grab a coffee sometime. No pressure." He was trying to appear casual, unaffected, but the underlying anxiety was palpable. I read each message, a detached observer of their desperate attempts to re-enter my life. They were like moths drawn to a flame, their greed blinding them to the true nature of the fire they were approaching. They believed they were orchestrating a reunion, a reconciliation. They were mistaken. They were walking into a meticulously planned trap, and I, Eleanor Vance, was ready to spring it. The vintage diamond brooch I'd acquired felt heavy on my dressing table, a symbol of the new life I was building, a life they were about to try and infiltrate. I knew exactly how I would respond, or rather, how I would respond, at least not yet. The game had truly begun.
The digital chirp of my smartphone, a sound I was still growing accustomed to, shattered the key of my afternoon at Serenity Shore.
The messages, as anticipated, had arrived. Mark's, a carefully crafted plea for a reunion, painted him as the devoted son, swamped by work but never forgetting his mother. Sarah's followed, a cascade of feigned regret, lamenting her perceived neglect and expressing a desperate longing to reconnect. David's was the most hesitant, a simple thinking of you that, in its brevity, screamed volumes of his discomfort. They were attempting a grand reconciliation, a calculated effort to mend bridges they themselves had burned to the ground. Then came the physical manifestation of their manufactured affection, a welcome back card, thick and embossed, arrived a few days later. It was delivered by a courier, a stark contrast to the casual indifference with which they had once tossed me onto the street. Inside, the sentiment was even more cloying. Sarah's elegant script declared how much she missed my cooking, how her own children often asked about their grandmother. Mark's contribution spoke of new opportunities, and how he'd been meaning to discuss some investments with me, his words laced with the familiar scent of avarice. David's simple note simply reiterated his desire to catch up.
He sat by the window, the afternoon sun warming my face, the card resting on my lap.
Brenda, sensing my quietude, had brought over a cup of Earl Grey. "Anything interesting, Eleanor?" she'd asked, her gaze gentle. I'd merely smiled, a practiced, neutral expression. How could I explain the bitter irony of this sudden outpouring of love? They had orchestrated my eviction, their faces hard and unforgiving as they'd watched me leave my former family home. Now, armed with the knowledge of my lottery win, they were performing a dramatic reversal, cloaking their greed in a veneer of familial concern. The phone calls began shortly after. Mark, his voice smooth and reassuring, spoke of his latest development project, subtly hinting at the financial strain he was under. He suggested a private lunch, a discreet venue where he could catch up properly. Sarah, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion, insisted on cooking me dinner, promising to recreate my favorite dishes. She spoke of how much she'd learned and how terrible she felt about the past, her words a carefully rehearsed apology. David, predictably, was the most awkward. He called late one evening, his voice low, asking if I was really okay, and if I'd considered their offers. He sounded almost apologetic for even bringing it up, a testament to his ingrained guilt. Each interaction was a performance, a calculated play for my newfound wealth. They spoke of missing me, of regret, of a shared past that they had so readily discarded. Their words were a stark contrast to their actions, a testament to their opportunistic nature. They believed I was the same vulnerable woman they had so easily dismissed. They were mistaken. With each insincere word, with each feigned expression of remorse, they were merely digging their own graves deeper. I listened, I nodded, I offered polite, non-committal responses, all the while observing their desperate attempts to reclaim their place in my life. The game was unfolding precisely as I had anticipated, and their manufactured affection was the most potent weapon in my arsenal. The vintage diamond brooch, a silent witness to my transformation, lay nestled in its velvet box, a promise of the justice to come. The flurry of communication from my children had been, to say the least, overwhelming. It had been a few days since the last phone call, a few days since the welcome back card had arrived, its saccharine sentiment still clinging to my memory like cheap perfume. Brenda had advised me to take my time, to let their manufactured affection simmer, to allow their desperation to ripen. And so, I had. I'd let the smartphone lie dormant, its incessant buzzing a reminder of the game I was playing. Now though, it was time to make my move. I decided to accept Mark's invitation for lunch at the Gilded Lily. It was a bold choice, a public stage for this elaborate charade, but I felt a strange sense of calm. The anticipation was a palpable thing, a humming energy beneath my skin. I chose a simple, elegant navy dress, accessorizing with a delicate pearl necklace and, tucked away in my new designer handbag, a small, intricately engraved silver compact. The vintage diamond brooch, I decided, would remain safely at Serenity Shores for now. It was a statement, yes, but one I intended to deploy with more precision. As I entered the hushed opulence of the Gilded Lily, I spotted Mark already at a secluded table, looking impeccably dressed and radiating an air of self-importance. He stood as I approached, a practiced smile plastered on his face. "Mother, you look wonderful," he exclaimed, his voice a touch too loud, too eager. "Mark, darling," I replied, my voice pitched to a tone of mild surprise, as if I'd just stumbled upon him. "What a coincidence. I had no idea you'd be here." I sat down, my movements deliberate, unhurried. He blinked, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh well, I thought we had a lunch planned." I tilted my head, a soft, questioning look on my face. "Did we?" I confess, things have been so hectic since I moved to Serenity Shores. So many new faces, so much to see. I must have forgotten. I picked up the menu, feigning a casual interest. "Did you know they have a remarkable selection of teas here?" Mark's brow furrowed. He clearly hadn't anticipated this. "Mother, I thought you knew. I sent you a message. And a card." "A card?" I echoed, my eyes widening slightly, as if just recalling something. "Oh yes, a card arrived. Very thoughtful. But Mark, I must confess, I'm still getting the hang of all this new technology. And frankly, I've been so caught up in settling in, enjoying the peace and quiet, that I haven't really been paying much attention to my phone. It's all rather overwhelming, you know." I gave him a gentle, almost apologetic smile. "I hadn't realized. Had you mentioned the lottery win to anyone?" His eyes darted around, a flicker of panic crossing his features. He seemed genuinely bewildered by my apparent ignorance, by my casual dismissal of their carefully orchestrated overtures. It was working. They thought they were manipulating me, but I was the one pulling the strings, weaving a web of calculated confusion. He stammered, "Well, of course, Mother. We were all so thrilled for you. We've been trying to reach you, to celebrate with you." "Thrilled," I repeated, a hint of genuine, albeit feigned, surprise in my voice. "Oh, how lovely. It's just, well, after everything, I suppose I've been a little hesitant to believe anything too good could happen. But it's so good to hear you say that, Mark. Truly." I met his gaze, my own eyes clear and guileless. "So you knew? You all knew I'd won?" The question hung in the air, innocent, yet loaded with a subtle accusation. He was caught, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble under the weight of my feigned bewilderment. Mark's face, once a mask of confident entitlement, was now a battlefield of confusion and dawning realization. He stammered, his carefully rehearsed lines dissolving into a jumble of half-formed sentences. "Mother, we just wanted to make sure you were settled. That you had everything you needed." I let a beat of silence stretch, allowing the weight of his words, and their unspoken implications, to settle. Then, with a gentle sigh, I reached for my designer handbag, its soft leather a stark contrast to the rough fabric of my old coat. From within, I produced a small, intricately engraved silver compact. I clicked it open, catching my reflection. "Everything I needed?" I mused, my voice soft but carrying a new steely undertone. "Well, Mark darling, after you and Sarah so kindly me, I found I had a rather surprising amount of time to myself. Time to reflect. Time to reconsider my priorities. And time to, shall we say, my affairs." I snapped the compact shut, the click echoing in the sudden quiet of our corner. Mark's gaze was fixed on the compact, then flickered to my hands, as if searching for any sign of my former destitution. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me to be so composed, so self-possessed. "It's just that," he began again, his voice now a hesitant whisper. "We heard, well, rumors, I suppose, about your good fortune." He couldn't bring himself to say the word lottery. I smiled, a slow, deliberate unfolding of my lips. "Rumors, you say? How fascinating. It seems my life, even in its perceived quietude, generates quite a bit of buzz. Much like your latest development project, I imagine, Mark. I saw the renderings online. Quite ambitious. Though, I must admit, the financing details were rather opaque. I do hope you've secured adequate funding. It would be a shame for such a grand vision to falter due to unforeseen circumstances." His eyes widened. He hadn't shared those details with anyone, certainly not with me. The implication was clear. I wasn't just aware of his win, I was privy to his current financial machinations. Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with a growing unease, finally interjected, her voice laced with a forced sweetness. "Mother, Mark is right. We were so worried about you. And we wanted to celebrate your win. We've been so proud of you, truly. Remember how I used to say you were the best cook in the world? My children often ask about their grandmother's famous roast chicken." I turned my attention to Sarah, my gaze steady. "Sarah dear, it's so good to hear you say that. And yes, your children. How are they? I recall you mentioning how much they enjoyed my jams. Such a shame I had to leave them behind. And your mention of roast chicken, it brings back memories. Memories of sharing meals, of family gatherings. Memories that, as I recall, were rather abruptly terminated when certain individuals decided my presence was no longer." The color drained from Sarah's face. The carefully constructed facade of maternal longing crumbled, revealing the raw ambition beneath. The mention of profitable and terminated hung in the air, a palpable accusation. "Mother, that's not fair," David piped up, his voice a little shaky. He'd been unusually quiet, his gaze darting between his siblings and me. "We were just trying to help. We thought it was best for everyone." "Best for everyone," I echoed, my voice laced with a touch of incredulity. "Is that what you told yourselves, David? While you watched me being escorted from the only home I'd ever known? While you ignored my calls? While you let me believe I was utterly alone?" I picked up my water glass, swirling the ice. "You know, David, with the experience I've gained, I now possess, I've come to understand that sometimes, the greatest kindness is to allow people to face the consequences of their own actions. And sometimes, the most valuable lessons are learned not from words, but from the stark reality of being cast aside. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark and Sarah stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. David looked as if he might cry. The carefully orchestrated reunion had devolved into a public dissection of their past betrayals, delivered with a chilling calm. They had come seeking my fortune, but they had found themselves on trial. And the verdict, I knew, was already sealed. The silence that had descended upon our corner of the Gilded Lily was thick, almost suffocating. Mark, Sarah, and David sat before me, their faces a tableau of stunned realization. The carefully constructed masks of filial concern had shattered, revealing the raw, unvarnished truth of their motivations. With the experience of decades etched into my very being, I understood that raw emotion was rarely as effective as a quiet, irrefutable presentation of facts. "You speak of worry," I began, my voice remarkably steady, cutting through the heavy air. "Of missing me. Of wanting to help. And I appreciate that sentiment truly, as much as I can now. But let us be clear about the timeline, shall we? The timeline of your concern. It began precisely when the whispers of my good fortune reached your ears. Before that, there was only silence. A silence punctuated by the sound of my eviction from the only home I had ever known." I paused, letting the words land, observing the subtle shifts in their expressions. Mark shifted in his seat, his gaze dropping to the pristine white tablecloth. Sarah's perfectly manicured hands clenched and unclenched in her lap. David, bless his weak heart, looked as though he might dissolve into tears. "You see," I continued, my tone remaining measured, almost conversational, with the clarity that comes from being cast adrift, one tends to re-evaluate everything. My memories, for instance, are quite vivid. I remember the conversation where Mark so eloquently explained that my presence was a financial burden, an untenable drain on resources. I recall Sarah's sympathetic assurances that she simply couldn't manage the emotional toll of my care, despite her overflowing home and apparent abundance of time. And David. David was simply too overwhelmed by it all, wasn't he? Too caught up in his own life to spare a moment for the woman who gave him life. I picked up the delicate china teacup, its warmth a comforting presence against my fingertips. Then the news. A lottery win. And suddenly, a veritable flood of concern. A deluge of regret. Invitations, cards, phone calls, all aimed at re-establishing a connection. A connection that, it seems, was only valuable when it was perceived to lead to financial benefit. I met each of their eyes in turn. "You speak of pride in my win. Of wanting to celebrate. But the truth, the bitter truth, is that your pride, your concern, your love, it all arrived with the lottery ticket. It was not a rediscovery of familial bonds, it was a calculated attempt to capitalize on a windfall. You saw me as a burden when I had nothing, but a prize when I possessed a fortune." A few other diners at adjacent tables had subtly turned their attention towards us, drawn by the hushed intensity of our conversation. They couldn't hear the specifics, perhaps, but the palpable tension was undeniable. I didn't need a grand pronouncement, the quiet exposure of their hypocrisy was far more potent. "I have no anger towards you," I stated, the words carrying a weight that surprised even myself. "Anger is an exhausting emotion, and I have far too much living left to do to waste it on resentment. What I have is understanding. An understanding of your character, forged in the crucible of your actions. You chose your path, and I have chosen mine. My path now leads me away from the shadows of your disappointment and towards the light of my own making." I placed the teacup back on its saucer with a soft click. "Consider this our final conversation. Not a reconciliation, but a clarification. A laying bare of the truth for your benefit, and perhaps, for the benefit of anyone who might find themselves in a similar position. The past cannot be undone, but it can certainly inform the future. And my future, I assure you, is one I am building with my own hands, with my own resources, and with a clarity of vision that only comes from having truly lost everything, only to find oneself again. The vintage diamond brooch, I knew, would be perfect for my next encounter, whenever that might be. It was a symbol of enduring value, much like the resilience I had discovered within myself. The hushed whispers at the adjacent tables had faded, replaced by the clinking of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation. My children sat before me, their faces etched with a dawning, unwelcome understanding. The carefully constructed facade of familial concern had crumbled, leaving behind the stark reality of their avarice. I had laid bare their actions, not with fury, but with a quiet, irrefutable presentation of their own betrayals. You speak of pride in my win, I continued, my voice still a calm, measured tone that belied the storm of emotions I had navigated to reach this point. Of wanting to celebrate. But the truth, the bitter truth, is that your pride, your concern, your love, it all arrived with the lottery ticket. It was not a rediscovery of familial bonds, it was a calculated attempt to capitalize on a windfall.
You saw me a burden when you had nothing, but a prize when you possessed a fortune.
I met each of their eyes in turn, holding their gaze for a fraction longer than was comfortable. Mark shifted in his seat, his gaze dropping to the pristine white tablecloth, a silent admission of guilt. Sarah's perfectly manicured hands, which had been so quick to offer insincere condolences, now clenched and unclenched in her lap, her composure fraying. David, bless his weak heart, looked as though he might dissolve into tears, his usual placid expression replaced by one of profound discomfort. I have no anger towards you, I stated, the words carrying a weight that surprised even myself. Anger is an exhausting emotion, and I have far too much living left to do to waste it on resentment. What I have is understanding. An understanding of your character, forged in the crucible of your actions. You chose your path, and I have chosen mine. I reached for my designer handbag, the soft leather of familiar comfort. From within, I produced a small, intricately engraved silver compact.
I clicked it open, catching my reflection.
My hair, now a stylish silver, framed a face that bore the marks of a life lived, but also the newfound serenity of independence. My path now leads me away from the shadows of your disappointment and towards the light of my own making. I snapped the compact shut, the click echoing in the sudden quiet of our corner. This was not a reconciliation, it was a clarification. A laying bare of the truth for their benefit, and perhaps, for the benefit of anyone who might find themselves in a similar position. The past cannot be undone, but it can certainly inform the future. Consider this our final conversation, I said, my voice soft but firm. You have had your opportunity to demonstrate familial affection, and you chose not to. You prioritized your own perceived financial security over my well-being. That choice has consequences. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my elegant dress. The vintage diamond brooch pinned to my lapel glinted under the soft restaurant lighting, a subtle testament to my enduring value. I have no intention of sharing my fortune with those who cast me aside when I was vulnerable. The ties that bound us were severed by your own hands, and I have no desire to restitch them with threads of gold. Mark finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Sarah's carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled, revealing the raw ambition beneath. David simply looked lost, adrift in the wreckage of his own making. They had come seeking my fortune, but they had found themselves on trial. And the verdict, I knew, was already sealed. I wish you both well, I said, the words carrying a finality that left no room for argument. May you learn from this experience. May you find contentment in your own endeavors. With a final measured glance at the three figures seated at the table, I turned and walked away, leaving them to face the quiet aftermath of their greed. The gilded lily, once a symbol of their superficial attempt at reconciliation, now served as the backdrop for their profound and self-inflicted isolation. My future, I assured them, was one I was building with my own hands, with my own resources, and with a clarity of vision that only comes from having truly lost everything, only to find oneself again. The path ahead was bright, and it was mine alone. That's it. If you liked this video, share it with your friends and leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Leave your comments saying what you thought of the video and what you would like to see in the next videos. Remembering that we have other videos in this style that you will like to watch, just enter our channel that I guarantee you will like. Until the next video.